it's me, MLB. Here's chapter 67 of Really Fake, and this one is titled Wholesomeness at its Finest. Sorry, Ian. You're the third wheel, Kuroo said as he walked slowly ahead of you and out the door with Pa. Ugh, again, you said playfully, with an eye roll as you closed and locked the door behind you all, and then followed them down the path. At that point, you hadn't really thought much about transport, how you, Kuroo, and Pa were going to get to and from the venue, but when you looked up and saw an all-too-familiar taxi sitting at the end of the path, you knew exactly how you were going to get there. "Is that Tony?" you asked Kuroo. "The one and only," Kuroo replied happily, opening the back door of the taxi for Pa. "My friend!" Tony's bright voice greeted Pa the minute the door had been opened. "Tony, lad, how have you been?" Pa greeted in return. "I have been waiting to see you again, dear friend," Tony said with a bright smile. "I trust you are well." "Never been better," Pa grunted as he hopped into the taxi, and Kuroo walked around the other side. "You're right up front, Yin. I'll look after Pa in the back," Kuroo said. You nodded and opened the passenger side door and smiled at Tony as you sat down and closed the door. "Bella," Tony greeted gently, "you are looking most lovely on this evening." "Oh," you chuckled bashfully. "Just trying to not look like my usual homeless self." "In my country we say, la bellezza va e viene, la bontà si mantiene. It is meaning, beauty comes and goes, kindness is always there." "Good saying," Kuroo piped up from the back seat. "Lucky for me, my girl has both beauty and kindness." "Stop, please, I can't do with the compliments." You sank down in your seat and covered your face while Kuroo grinned from the back seat. "She knows it's true," he added as Tony pulled away from the curb and headed off down the road to the RSL that had been chosen for dinner that night. It was a pleasant drive there, and Kuroo again helped Pa out of the back seat once he got to the venue. "Thank you, Tony," you said politely, getting out and letting Kuroo lean into the open door with some money in hand for Tony. "Take that away from me," Tony said emphatically. "Ti sto dicendo, I do not need it. Please, go and have a good dinner and I will be back to pick you up at the end of the night." "You're a good man, Tony," Kuroo said as he pulled his head back from the taxi and stood up. "Si, giovanotto," Tony smiled. "Go now, I will be back." Kuroo nodded and closed the passenger door and then turned back to the two of you, and you all headed to the door of the RSL. "Is Mrs. Happy here already?" you asked Pa. "I sure hope so," he said brightly. "Otherwise I'll be having a dinner with the two of you." "I'm sure she'll be here," Kuroo said reassuringly to Pa. He nodded, and you all entered in. The minute you stepped through, you started looking for Mrs. Happy and saw her sitting on the bench up against the wall across the foyer from where you had entered. Although Pa's eyesight wasn't that good, he still spotted her and let out a weak-sounding wolf whistle as you all walked over to her. "Who whistles that old lady?" she grunted with a small blush on her round cheeks. "An old man," he replied quickly, and she looked away so that she could hide the smile on her face. Not wanting to interrupt Pa and her little flirting session, you didn't introduce Kuroo just then, figuring that you had all night to make introductions, so let Mrs. Happy and Pa walk on ahead towards the front desk. "Booking for 4 under Lynn?" Pa said to the girl on the front desk, and she looked down the list in front of her and then nodded. "Right this way, please." You were all led towards the indoor dining section and sat at a round table with 4 seats, one for each of you. Pa tried to very kindly pull Mrs. Happy's seat out for her to sit so that she could sit down, but she wasn't having any of it. "No, you sit," she directed him, pointing to the chair next to hers. "This is for you," he said with a wobbly grin. "I want to push your chair in." He tried to step around her to get behind her chair, but she stood her ground. "How you push the chair?" she asked bluntly. "You need 2 hands. You only have 1. Now sit." "I can push it in with another strong item of mine," he leered, and you smacked your hand to your mouth with horror. "You have pickle," she stated in her thick accent, glaring at him. "I took a Viagra pill," he said loudly. "Shh!" You hushed him from across the table, shaking your head as he cackled in his old man voice and sat down, letting Mrs. Happy push him in. "You're so loud, Pa, people will hear you," you chided. Thankfully, the waitress walked over at that point, so the topic changed. "Good evening, Jessica," Pa greeted the girl. "Oh, it's you, Mr. Lin," she greeted in a friendly voice. "I haven't seen you for ages. I thought you'd start going to our competition across the road." "I could never do that," he replied with a lopsided grin. "I've been in hospital, but I'm out now. with one useless arm and a girlfriend." The waitress looked at the very sour-looking Mrs. Happy and gave her a hesitant smile. "Nice to meet you," she greeted with reservation. "I am Kara," the supposed girlfriend, Mrs. Happy, replied blandly. "Oh, I see," the waitress said, looking from Mrs. Happy back to Pa. "Well, that's wonderful that you're okay, Mr. Lin." "It's all very complicated," you added in, drawing the waitress's attention to yourself. "Maybe we'll just order instead of talking about Pa's convoluted life?" "Yeah, sounds good," the waitress replied. "What can I get for everyone? Mr. Lin, would you like the usual cabbage soup?" "Oh, yes, and that yummy bread that it comes with, please," Pa said, sounding so childlike with his happiness. "And one bowl for me missus as well." "2 bowls of soup," the waitress mumbled to herself as she jotted the order down and then turned to you and Kuroo. And we will pause chapter 67 there, and I'll see you tomorrow for 68.